This is a high-level training, teaching lesson. Most people will never look for this, never find this, and if they do, dismiss it away. But this is meant for the few people that understand what this means. What is loosing and binding? How do we find out if we can go through this world and not succumb to the ways of man? What do we have to do in order to survive? Now, we sign all kinds of contracts, and according to the teachings of Jesus, our yes is to be yes and our no is to be no. Now, this was in the context of swearing, not using the Lord's name in vain, and to just be verifiable that what we say and who we are and what we do is us, and we don't have to up that at all because the quality of the individual is high. However, when Jesus was crucified and he said that he would build his church on Peter, he said that we were given the power of loosing and binding. Whatever we loosed here on earth would be loosed in heaven. Whatever we bound here on earth would be bound in heaven. And so I would like to bring up the concept of how we're already avoiding in these what I believe may be the end days, or the start of the end days, and maybe they would have already been here the whole time since Jesus left us. I don't know when it's going to come down. It's written that even the angels don't know the hour, but we are to know the signs of it. Like Jesus said, you're not going to receive a miraculous sign. You're not worthy of that. He was speaking to the wicked and perverse generation that wasn't capable of seeing it. And the reason why he wouldn't give it to them is because they didn't deserve it. But he said, you should be able to see the end days coming. Like a farmer sees the sky and sees it as red, and because of his knowledge and his commitment to his food and what he needs to have to make a sustainable living, he knows it's going to rain. He knows how to read the signs for things he wants in this immediate world. But why do people not know how to read the signs of what's happening in this world, and how one can see that when Jesus taught with his parables and his teachings, he always compared the real world with the kingdom of heaven? How can a person not see those things? Well, I think it's because they're not looking. Jesus said that the road to salvation was narrow and very few would find it. And he said that the road to destruction was broad and almost everybody was on it. Let's talk about what loosing and binding is and how we're going to avoid the mark of the beast. So far, I can tell you, matter-of-factly, that I would not be sitting here in front of you right now talking if I had to, matter-of-fact, keep all the contracts that I've clicked on. I wouldn't have entered into the computer age. I wouldn't have been able to use credit cards. There's a lot of things that I would have never measured up to in the eyes of mankind if I lived according to just what they asked of me on the things that I have to sign. I heard once somebody said it took over 20 days a year for a person to read and comprehend all the things and all the ramifications of everything that he signs or clicks on, as the computer generation has brought to us. How are we able to continue to live in this high-tech generation where we do things that is not because we're just picking something for someone and he pays us, like a farm or something like that? We have our social security numbers have been involved. We have all the laws of this country that are involved, and different laws around the country. I haven't researched it. Probably do a lot of the same things. We are subject to all the terms of so many things that we participate in every single day. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we overcome that? How can we do what needs to be done to raise our families and to serve what we believe our mission statement or purpose in life is, if we're constantly being told by man what's acceptable? How could we have lived into this age that we're in now? And how could we even know what it is that we're signing when we sign something? A software agreement, a computer, anything, a cell phone agreement, anything. How do we know what it is that we're even signing? Well, I say that because if we're found and we're serving and we're bearing our cross, what we're asked to do in love, in the final commandment that Jesus gave at the Last Supper, was to, in love one another as ourselves through his teachings. And so we have to believe that we believe and are worthy of doing in that observance of that final greatest commandment unto others greater, with a more godly purpose, according to Jesus' teachings, than they're even capable of doing unto themselves. And in so doing, we can loose ourselves from their hyper-restrictive ways of trying to box us in and make us serve and follow the ways of mankind. Because we know that what we would want for them is higher than what they're even asking of us, we can bypass that in a loosing type of way. We can relieve ourselves from it because we know that the terms that we agree to are higher than the terms that have even been asked on those papers and on those click-throughs and on those contracts. If we were to do what those contracts said, essentially they're set up to serve money. They're essentially served up to box us in and make us have to operate in a certain way so that the person that holds us liable to those contracts will benefit in this material world according to money. Now, Jesus said the love of money is the root of all evil. And in these contracts, you will find that not just money, but just the ways of this world are held in place. By almost everything that you sign, you're always told, you're going to uphold this. You're going to do what we say. But we know that money is the root of all evil if you're loving it, if you're pursuing that first. And we know that our true love should be for our brothers and for our service to Jesus through his teachings and to love others as ourselves. So therefore, we are given the ability to loose on earth and in heaven in order to bestow upon those that would have a contract made with us a higher contract than even they're asking us for. So even if we didn't do what it said in the contract, we know entering into it that we're already ahead. What does Jesus say about contracts? Jesus says that when we came to work at the garden in the early morning hours, and then more came, and then more came, at the end of the day, the wages they agreed to were paid to them, and the wages were the same for every single one of them. But the ones that worked longer, even though they agreed, they thought they'd get more when they saw the people that worked less. Well, he equated this to the chosen people, and he equated this to the real world things. He also equated it to the way we're going to line up to have salvation, to be seen and accounted for our hearts and our judgment. And even though we weren't the chosen people, we were allowed, once he was finished with all his business with the chosen people, to call on his name and receive what he had for us. And so we did not work. We did not labor like they did, but we still received the same reward. And that's what that contract means. Now, if we go into any contract knowing that we're not going to necessarily say we agree to your terms, even though we're going to sign it, the reason why we can sign it is because our terms, that we would allow that individual, in the sense that we love him like a brother, according to Christ's teachings, are higher than the terms he asks for us in the worldly terms. And in thus, we can sign it, knowing that we've already surpassed what he requires. Now, he may not see it that way, but that's only because he does not understand Jesus' teachings. He does not understand where we're coming from. Now, if what he wants isn't achieved by him, by that contract, because of what you're going to do, he may say, you're wrong, you're evil, I'll take you to jail, whatever. And if that's the case, Jesus says, on the way to the judge, make sure you work it out with the person that's accusing you so that you won't be turned over to the jailer. Well, of course, we're going to work it out if somebody ever accuses us of doing something wrong. We're going to work it out because if they feel they've been wronged, we do not want damage to our witness. And if they think of us as less than what we are, well, we've damaged it. And if they don't know Jesus' teachings and they don't know Jesus, even if what we show is persecuted and looked down at, we know in our hearts that we will receive blessing, according to the Sermon on the Mount, for anything that we're persecuted for. So we know that our hearts are pure, and we know that even if man judges us and puts us in a place of condemnation in the servitude to man, that we still are not going to actually be doing anything that we are guilty of in the sight of God or through his son Jesus. And that's what loosing That's an example of what loosing can be. But let's talk about, and I saved this for the end, how do you know you have the ability to loose? How do you know that the Pope doesn't grant it to you, or your local church? How do you know that another religion doesn't grant it? The logic of this is simple, and you have to buy into it and believe it, or it doesn't work. Everything only works if you believe it and understand it. Jesus made it so simple that farmers and fishermen can understand it, children can understand it. Jesus said that whenever two or more are gathered in his name, that there is love. We know that God created man and woman, and for that reason, they would leave their mother and father and become married as one flesh. This is a part of the grand design and purpose that Jesus spoke about, and even in the Older Testament that they spoke about, and even in the very first book, Genesis, that they spoke about. And so because there's love, the two people that come together have the ability to have Jesus with him. And if they have that ability, then it would make sense that that's all the things that is necessary for a church. Especially when Jesus was crucified and he died, there was a loud thunderclap and the temple curtain was torn in two. The place that kept people out for only the holiest of holies and those that were ordained and allowed to go into there under certain circumstances were allowed to where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. That temple curtain was torn in two, and because of that, we have access to the area that was once forbidden, and because of the Holy Spirit coming, we have access to direct communications through Jesus' teachings with God. This is the main message of Jesus. But I'm making this video today to tell you how, in a practical sense, we can use the powers he gives us in the final moments before his death and through his teachings through his life. So basically, to summarize, what I'm saying here is, if we're already persecuted and we're already confined by mankind, and we're already going into the realm of where we have to compete against man's structures just to live, especially in this new age, we have to be able to understand what these tools are that were given to us and what their practical purpose was and what's necessary to have them. Now, one of the things I do all the time is talk to my wife, and I say, if you're not with me, if we don't believe together, we don't make that two or more gathered together church, and Jesus is not with us, if we're not following his will and his words and his teachings, then whatever we try to do will fail. We have to have the blessing of being persecuted and being against the ways of love of money and the world, so that when we use a higher calling, we're allowed. We're given that ability through Jesus. And we have to take that very seriously. And if we're not in unison on that, and we don't understand his teachings, and we're just doing it to serve our own earthly purposes, well, that's almost like the same thing as taking the mark of the beast. Because the only reason we're doing anything is to stay alive. We don't understand a larger commitment. It could be right now that the mark of the beast is already being given. And it's not something so simple that you could just point it out like there's a 666, whatever that means. It could be right now that we're being set up in the understanding or the lack of understanding of what it is I'm talking about in this video today. We're being set up to go down a road that we can't return from. If we don't understand what we're doing while we're on that road, and we succumb to what man asks of us without question, we fail. We're taking the mark of the beast in some way, even before we know it. Jesus said not to put your faith in man. We will be protected while we bear our cross, so that we are righteous and that we'll be forgiven, and what's in our heart will be right and pure if we ask for that, if we make that our goal and our motive in this service, in this world, rather than what can we do in this world to gain something from. This is what I really, really would like to get out there, because when you go to the church, the formalized church, a lot of times you're not getting this message. When you look at the formalized religions of the world, a lot of the times you're not getting this message. What you're doing a lot of times is you're getting a message that would, if followed through on, serve the people in the church in this world. So that's why I'm making this video today. We have to bring a way that people can understand what this means into a more common view. Now I'm going to put this on my page, and I'd like to talk with you about it. But I'm going to tell you something right now. I have a very hard time finding anybody else that finds these things and can talk on the level worthy of talking about these things. These are high-level teachings that few people talk about. You hardly ever hear about it in Sunday school or church in a way that you can understand, as simply as I put it here today. Please get with me, talk to me about it, rebuke me and polish me, as my goal is to do the same for you. This is what we're to do as brothers in Christ for one another, so that we know that we are following what we should be following and using the purposes and the powers that we've been given to thwart man's advances and to keep ourselves alive and serve and bear our cross as we can. I like to bring another point into this, is that Jesus was said that he fled to elude in the crowds when they tried to get him on a number of occasions. Well, in our world today, fleeing to elude is illegal. I love the fact that he was accused of doing things that were illegal and did things illegal. He was warranted in the things he did. When he was one time walking along the streets and he took some kernels of wheat in his hand, he was told, oh, you can't do that on the Sabbath. That's like harvesting. And one of the things that Jesus did that I like to point out a lot is he said, you Pharisees and your Sadducees, you teachers of the law, have made things so incredibly restricted that even you, in your litigiousness, can't follow all the things that you try to implement for man. And he said that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Man in this earthly realm, to serve money and his love for it, and what it'll bring him in desires and pleasure fulfillment, has twisted around the things that Jesus would have us to know and understand and learn about. When we see these things, we need to learn to recognize them, just like that red sky that the farmer knew what that meant. We have to all help one another as believers to recognize these things and see their significance, so that we're always in a perpetual state of prayer, always aware of what these things mean at all points of our life, because the filter of these things are some of the gifts that the Holy Spirit, through Jesus' teachings, give to us. And we have to always be on. Every time we hear something or react to something, we have to be aware of how it comes to us and what it means before. Otherwise, we may be reacting improperly. And then our yes isn't yes and our no is not no. And that's really the damage. When we're not solid enough to know who we are and what our yes is and what our no is, that's when we fail at a contract. That's when we fail God. We want to not do that. That's much more important than a contract that man may have, that if you don't follow, you won't even make it another day or another week. I know I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I wouldn't have made it as far as I have if I bowed to all the things that mankind required from me. So let's talk about this, people. This is a Conscious Counseling 101 subject for the very few that are capable of understanding what it means. You may have things that you'd like to talk about that are buried deep inside your issues, your self-issues for your life. I can talk to you about those things. But some of the things in this video, if you understand them, you may not even need anybody to talk to you about it. If you get a good foundation and you know what you're standing on and why and what it all means, that will guide you through all the things in the ways of the world and through all man's obstacles. Because they're trapped by darkness, not knowing what they do, but to serve themselves and money. You are a child of the light. You know more than they do. Now you have to use it properly as well. Otherwise, you will be found to be a wolf in sheep's clothing and thrown outside the gates. You don't want that to happen. So be aware of these things. Serve, bear your cross. Do what you know you need to do and attempt to be perfect in spite of your human weaknesses. And that's the message for today. If you have questions about these things or would like me to elaborate in other videos, please let me know. I'm Paul Roberts. Peace be with you.